The topic of substantially modifying the combat mechanics of Souls games is a very touchy subject for hardcore fans of them, but I frankly see no way to continue the boss complexity escalation without doing so. The next possible steps beyond the cancer that is Radon 2 and Millennia are bosses that have outright undodgeable attacks, meaning every fight is effectively on a timer, since you are guaranteed to get hit every so often. Attacks that always insta-kill you, meaning you have to no-hit them, or making every single attack completely untelegraphed, meaning trial and error memorization of exact dodge timings is the sole viable tactic. The reason is rather simple, and ironically the same reason old COD games resorted to grenade spam after introducing regenerating health. It's the only trick the enemies have left up their sleeve. The player has a single but very powerful dodge ability, the roll, which gives you invincibility frames. Since iframes make enemy attack hitboxes redundant, the game has to test timing if it wants to be difficult, because it doesn't matter what fancy moves the boss can do if the player can literally just phase through them. At the same time, it is impossible to make the game test anything else mechanically. Giving the game undodgeable attacks, for example, is a DPS check, so that tests build crafting rather than skill at the combat mechanics, because the only other options the player has to avoid damage are jumping, which From always tests using trial and error because otherwise it would be totally obvious and thus trivial to see which attacks should be jumped, and running out of the way, which itself can only work for hugely telegraphed, easy to avoid attacks anyway. The game can't be designed around testing anything else because any other abilities the player has are a function of their character build, and even then, the additions are limited to a block. If you have a shield, you can block with a weapon, but it's not a great idea, and potentially an additional movement ability as an Ash of War like Bloodhound Step. The game has such a variety of abilities for the player to use, but you can only ever use one at a time, and in any case, almost none of them are as useful as the iframes on a roll, incentivizing people to fall back on that anyway and dedicate their L2 to damage instead, as I've explained before in the roll slop essay. The primary way the game could try to add more complexity to the skill test, without forcing you to no-hit the whole game or something, is to add something else to test, and I think the most obvious one is positioning, i.e., testing your ability to position yourself properly, both to avoid enemy attacks and to get past enemy defenses, get past their shield, hit a weak point, counter their own dodges, etc. Instead of just being a memorized rhythm puzzle, now the game is a puzzle of figuring out where and how to move to keep yourself alive while also getting hits in on the boss. Of course, for positioning to matter, the boss can't have the ability to just fill the entire arena with an AoE you have to iframe through. And likewise, you can't have an ability that allows you to avoid all damage no matter where you are. Dodging would need to be treated as an actual movement ability, something that physically moves you out of the way of an enemy attack, rather than an iframe activation button that might as well turn you into a hovering ghost given how it works. That in itself necessitates a few changes. For one, enemy hitboxes would need to be tightened right up, made essentially perfect, cohabiting the same space as the enemy's actual character model. That way you aren't phasing through enemy attacks with iframes, you're literally moving your character's hitbox out of the way of the attack hitbox. The roll as it currently exists probably wouldn't work anymore because it's just an animation. It's not designed to actually avoid hitboxes spatially. What the player would actually need are actual dodge moves with varying speeds and distances for countering different attacks and allowing greater and lesser space for an immediate counterattack. I'm specifically thinking of a lateral dodge, a sidestep activated by tapping the dodge button that moves in the direction you move the left stick, which would be the quickest and shortest move, a leap, activated by either holding or perhaps double tapping the dodge button that requires some wind up but lets you move farther, and finally a jumping dodge or dive where you hit dodge and jump at the same time to wind up and then hurl yourself in that direction, taking a bit of time to execute but moving you quite far. But now I've given away my gambit, for I picked the forbidden fruit of button combos, and I can already hear the From fans screeching about how Souls games aren't action games and this destroys their identity. Well, frankly, if their identity from now on is going to be memorizing a pattern of roll timings through rigorous trial and error, their identity is shit, and I want to destroy it. If the bosses are going to act like action characters, then I, the player, also want to be an action character. I want to have a couple dozen fancy moves I can pull at any given time, attack combos I can pull off. In short, I want to be able to have as much fun as the bosses now clearly are. That's not just some point of seethe from Joseph Anderson. It's very much true. Some of the bosses in Elden Ring act like action game characters where you're stuck playing Dark Souls. It's stifling, unfair, and incongruous. We've reached the limits here. There's no further to go with the mechanics as they are, and I would definitely argue we don't need more of the same, given how gargantuan Elden Ring already is. It's time to either add to the formula and turn the player into a proper action character with the combos and moves to match the boss escalation, or shift gears and base the game around something else the way Sekiro did with parrying. Hell, given the state of the endgame bosses in Elden Ring, I'd argue we're past the point this should have been done anyway. It will never not feel strange that I can't say quick step and also use the bolt of Grand Sax or any other somber weapon at the same time beyond rigid adherence to a limited player moveset. Hell, the thing is a spear. Why can't I do an impaling thrust with it? Why do I have to pick? Imagine a version of Elden Ring where all spells and Ashes of War were part of one big skill pool, and you could assign the use of several of them to a selection of button combos. How many you could use could be tied to ability slots, a universalized version of spell slots that you gain by finding memory stones or some analog, and which ones you could use would depend on your stats. That is, I think abilities that are currently Ashes of War should actually be locked behind stat requirements, just like spells, as well as the weapon you currently have equipped. So different weapons have different moves, but you can still use multiple at once instead of a single one bound to L2. So sure, when you start the game, you should have just the base, i.e. current Elden Ring moveset with single button abilities, but as you level up and unlock new abilities and more ability slots, your character's moveset expands so that by the end of the game, you're comboing attacks and moves all over the place, not unlike the bosses themselves. Am I am I really crazy here? Is this not fair? Would this not be awesome? Now, granted, perhaps my preference here is skewed by my non-standard reason for playing the game. As I've said before, I actually play Elden Ring for power fantasy, not a masochistic struggle. If I want that, I'll play Alien Isolation or Arma or something. Perhaps those who wish for maximal struggle reject this course because it would make the game easier, which isn't what they want. But that only means we're at an impasse, a gulf of preference. I can't convince you to want what I want, but that doesn't mean I don't desire it all the same. And I do believe From would be better for following my advice, if only because it would prevent their design from stagnating. And God knows we don't need more devs regurgitating the same slop game after game. Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Elden Ring will all still be here if you want to indulge your masochism, but going forward, indeed to even go forward design-wise, things have to change if From wants their games to remain fresh experiences.